You know, we tend to think of teaching as, well, delivering information, right? But the real challenge, the thing that keeps great teachers up at night, isn't about the delivery at all. It's about what happens on the other side. Is anyone actually learning? And that simple question, believe me, is way more complicated than it sounds. It's really the heart of what we're diving into today. So let's meet Jennifer. She's a teacher, and she just gave an exam on light and color. I mean, she did everything right. She was organized, she hammered home the main points, she even had the students break into small groups. But now she's grading the tests, and it's a disaster. Her students have some really serious misunderstandings. They just didn't get it. And she's left staring at these papers, asking that question that you hear in classrooms everywhere. Why didn't they learn?
And look, Jennifer's story isn't just her story. It's the dilemma for pretty much every educator out there. When you pour your heart into a lesson and it just falls flat, what's the deal? Is it the student, the subject? Is it you, the teacher? Or is it something bigger? That is the question that's going to frame this entire explainer.
To really find the answer, we have to zoom out, way beyond the walls of one classroom. See, Jennifer's problem is actually tied into these huge, system-wide debates about what education is even supposed to be doing. And right now, there are two major, and I mean competing, philosophies that are shaping our schools.
On one side, you've got what's called the standards movement. The idea here is pretty straightforward. Fix schools from the inside. We're talking higher standards, more core requirements, and a whole lot of standardized tests to see who's making the grade. But then you've got another group pushing for a broader, bolder approach, and they're saying, whoa, hold on a second, you're missing the point. They argue that you can't close the achievement gap by just focusing on what happens inside the school because the real problems often start outside with things like poverty and social inequality.
And you know what? The data really seems to back up that broader, bolder view. Just take a look at this chart. It shows how much these out-of-school factors really matter. Get this, differences in child health alone account for a staggering 25% of the achievement gap. The argument is pretty clear. It's kind of unfair to expect schools to solve problems that actually start in society itself.
So, if the problem is both this massive systemic thing and also a really personal classroom thing, where do we even begin to find a solution? Well, it starts with understanding the very organ we're trying to teach, the brain. Turns out, the science of learning gives us an incredible toolkit to start tackling these challenges, and it all begins with a pretty cool experiment.
Okay, so check this out. In a landmark study, researchers took two groups of rats. They raised one group in a complex environment, with toys, other rats to play with, the whole shebang. The other group was raised in an impoverished environment, basically isolated in empty cages. And the results were, well, they were mind-blowing. The rats from the fun, complex environment learned way faster. But here's the crazy part. Their brains were physically different. They had 20 to 25% more synapses. Those are the connections between nerve cells. The takeaway is huge. The right environment literally builds a better, more powerful brain.
So here's the key takeaway from all this brain science. Learning isn't just about downloading new files into your head. It's about connecting those new files to everything that's already in there. There's this fantastic children's story called Fish is Fish that just nails this idea. A frog tells his fish friend all about the world on land. He describes birds and cows and people, and the fish tries so hard to imagine them, but every single thing it pictures is just a fish with wings, or a fish with horns and an udder, or a fish walking on its tail. It can only build the new out of what it already knows. And that is exactly how our brains work too.
So once you really get that principle, that every single person is building on their own unique prior knowledge, it changes the whole game. It means that any kind of one-size-fits-all teaching is basically set up to fail from the start. So how do teachers actually put this science into practice? Let's take a look at the story of Jack, a teacher who found a really powerful way to reach every single student in his class. What Jack found was something called differentiated instruction, and it's a total shift in how you think about teaching. Instead of making all the students try to fit into one way of doing things, the teacher actually adapts the teaching to fit the students' different needs, their interests, and where they're at in their learning. It's all about being flexible and giving students choices.
So what does that actually look like in a real classroom? Well, a differentiated classroom might be set up with these flexible learning zones. So at any given moment, you could have some students over here working on computers, another group over there having a small group discussion, a couple of students working together to edit a paper, and maybe a few others just working quietly by themselves. It's this dynamic, buzzing environment built for all the different ways that kids learn.
And here is a totally brilliant and simple example of this in action. A tic-tac-toe choice board. This one's for a unit on Malaysia. The rule is students have to complete 3 activities to make a line.
Just like in tic-tac-toe. This super simple structure gives them real choice in how they learn, letting them pick activities that actually interest them. But it also makes sure they're still mastering all the core concepts. It's fantastic.
All these strategies are great, but it kind of brings us to a much deeper question, right? We're helping students learn, but what are we helping them learn for? I mean, is the real goal just to get a good grade on a test? Or should we be aiming for something more, something deeper?
A researcher named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and I hope I'm saying that right, he studied those moments when people are just completely lost in what they're doing, totally absorbed and engaged. He called this state flow. And what he found was that flow happens when people get to choose their own goals and they get satisfaction from the activity itself, not from some external reward. The lesson for schools here is massive. Real engagement, that deep learning, it comes from a spark inside, not from a system of rules and grades.
Okay, so if we want students to find that flow, what should we be pointing them towards? Well, in an age where we're just drowning in information, the educator Howard Gardner says one of the most critical skills we can have is the synthesizing mind. That's the ability to look at tons of different sources, figure out what's actually important, and then weave it all together into something that makes sense. It's an absolutely vital skill, and yet we almost never explicitly teach it in schools.
To teach these kinds of skills and to create that sense of flow, we have to completely rethink how we measure progress. We need a big shift away from assessment of learning. That's like your final exam, the autopsy that just tells you what happened, and move towards assessment for learning. This is more like a checkup. It's ongoing feedback that doesn't just judge you, it gives you information you can actually use to get better. It's a tool for growth, not a final verdict.
And get this, the impact is not small, it's huge. A massive review of studies found that good formative assessment can have an effect size on student learning somewhere between 0.4 and 0.7. Now, to put that into perspective for you, that is a bigger positive impact than almost any other thing we do in education. And here's the best part. It helps the lowest achieving students the most, which helps close the very gaps we've been trying to fix all along.
So, all of this brings us right back to where we started, but now with a completely new perspective. This whole journey, from Jennifer's frustrating night of grading papers, all the way to the science of the brain and the art of a modern classroom, it really forces us to ask one fundamental question. Knowing what we know now about how people really learn, are we teaching the right things in the right way?